Hello again. Well, the meeting decided, or the Wi-Fi decided to quit on the second half of the class, and I thought I got it back on, and somehow it didn't get recorded. So I'm redoing the second half of the class so that we have that information available to you. So we are on workbook lesson 21, and the title of that lesson is I Am Determined to See Things Differently. And in paragraph 2, line 3, it talks about the idea of anger may take the form of any reaction ranging from mild irritation to rage. And Jesus is trying to remind us that it doesn't matter if it's rage or if it's just a mild irritation. It's all the same. Have I lost my peace? That's the designated experience. Did I lose my peace? And if I lost my peace, it doesn't matter how big or small it was. If it was some insignificant thing or something horrible that has happened, it's all coming from the fact that we're aligned with the mind of the ego. It's not about what happens in the world down here. Now, obviously, our experience is this happened, and therefore I'm upset. But it's really the fact that we've separated from God that is bringing this experience of pain because we're aligned with the separated mind. Paragraph or line number 5, you will become increasingly aware that a slight twinge of annoyance is nothing but a veil drawn over intense fury. So again, we begin to become more acclimated, more aware that even the tiniest irritation or twinge of annoyance is really coming from the same place. And again, it's coming from the mind that has chosen for the ego instead of the Holy Spirit. Now, the beauty of the study of the Course, the awareness of what the Course has to offer, is that we can now, instead of focus on fixing the situation or running from the situation, it's about going to our mind, realizing I must have chosen wrongly and I can choose again. But Jesus doesn't want us to sweep under the carpet those tiny little annoyances. He wants us to hone in on them so that we can really get clear. Anything, literally anything that disrupts my peace is food for practice of the Course. All right, so paragraph number 3 says, try, therefore, not to let the little thoughts of anger escape you in the practice periods. Remember that you do not really recognize what arouses anger in you, and nothing that you believe in this connection means anything. You will probably be tempted to dwell more on some situations or persons than on others, on the fallacious grounds that they are more obvious. This is not so. It is merely an example of the belief that some forms of attack are more justified than others. So try, therefore, not to let the little thoughts of anger escape you in the practice periods. Because again, Jesus wants us to hone in on all things, big or small, because again, if they're equal in value to our lack of peace, they're equal to value in practicing. So begin to become aware. And I think initially, we're obviously going to be more aware when things are much more difficult. But as we keep practicing, we'll start to fine tune and hone in on the smallest thing that can disrupt my peace. Remember that you do not really recognize what arouses anger in you, and nothing that you believe in this connection means anything, because I'm always believing that this is where my anger is coming from, the situation in response to what's going on in the world. But really, all this is the trigger that triggers this memory of something that's going on here instead of down here. So instead of using this to point my finger at the problem, I use this to remind me, oh, something within the world appears to have taken my peace away. Therefore, that means I'm aligned with the ego. And when I'm ready, I can choose differently. So we use the purpose the ego set up for another reason this time. You will probably be tempted to dwell more on some situations or persons than on others, on the fallacious grounds that they are more obvious. So again, in the practice, in the fine-tuning of the process of practicing the course, we're going to be pulled into some situations more than others, and it's going to seem very obvious as to why we do that. But eventually you will immediately, as soon as anything that seemingly takes your peace away, you'll remember this formula, I guess you could say, and you'll choose different. And I can remember once having a situation where somebody just walked in the room, and I can immediately tell in my body that there was this level of fear that was coming to the surface. So I immediately began to ask for healing or ask for help in regard to the situation. So it's almost as though your physical body becomes much more in tune with the lack of peace, so that you recognize it much more quickly. And again, he says this is not so. It's not so that certain things are more valuable or important in this practice. They're all equally the same again. It is merely an example of the belief that some forms of attack are more justified than others. And again, the Course is trying to help us understand it doesn't matter. They're all the same. But because we're so used to the concept of a hierarchy of issues in our world, one thing's important, one thing's not very important. Don't worry about that. But Jesus wants us to apply this from the perspective of they're all equally the same. You're either at peace or you're not at peace. Big or small makes no difference. So paragraph 4, he says, as you search your mind for all the forms in which attack thoughts present themselves, hold each one in mind while you tell yourself. So he wants us to search our mind in this particular workbook at times during the day. Search your mind. Are there forms of attack thoughts that are in your mind that are present, so that we can become more consciously aware at those attack thoughts, those fear thoughts, those lack of peace thoughts, so that we can work on practicing applying the principles of the Course. So he says, say this to yourself while you're doing this. I am determined to see blank, and you can fill in any issue that comes up in your day differently. But as I was reading through this, I thought, we really have to hold that one a bit for a few minutes, because are you really determined to see this differently? Or do you want to hold on to the problem and wish that God will take the problem away? Because you really have to become aware. If I'm holding the problem, especially if I'm blaming somebody for my lack of peace, I'm literally saying, I don't want this. So I'm not really determined to see it differently. I'm still clinging to this. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in the respect that that's probably going to happen. But if you do find yourself there, what the Course is asking us to do is be very honest with yourself. Okay, I see this, but I'm not ready to step over here. And that's honesty, because you're aware and you're being honest with yourself. I'm not ready to take that next step, which is perfectly fine. But always know you have the option to say, okay, Holy Spirit, this is what's going on. This is where I am. And I know I'm not ready to step over to that other side, but ask me, or please help me come to the point where one day I will be ready and willing to choose a different choice. So it's almost as though no matter where you are on this journey, you have the option to open that door just a little bit more. But honesty is so important, valuable, and literally necessary, because if I'm not being honest with myself on the journey of where I am, then I'm really in a pipe dream. I'm thinking about something that's never going to happen because I'm not dealing with what's really going on here. So as you're going through your daily experiences of upset and irritation, really question, am I willing to let this go so I can find the answer he has to offer instead? Sometimes that answer is going to be yes. Sometimes it might be no. But again, be very honest with yourself. So number 5, try to be as specific as possible. You may, for example, focus your anger on a particular attribute or of a particular person, believing that the anger is limited to this aspect. If your perception is suffering from this form of distortion, say, and then he goes on, but well, all right, I'll read that. So I'm determined to see this specific attribute in the person's name differently. That way, again, you're being very specific. You're honing in on what's really seemingly what's really upsetting you. So again, try to be as specific as possible. Hone in very clearly on what it is that's seemingly taking your peace away. You may, for example, focus your anger on a particular attribute of a particular person. And aren't there sometimes people in your life that they just, it's like they can just get that dig in there and it just can get you every time you see them, every time you encounter that person. So what is that specific that really gets to you? And we think that the anger is limited to this aspect or this situation or circumstances. But as he's trying to tell us in workbook lesson number 5, I'm not upset for this. But we start with where we believe our upset is coming from so that we can eventually let that go, recognize it's really not coming from here, it's coming from here. And then we can, when we're ready, step over to here. And again, question yourself throughout your day as you're assimilating and practicing the course. Am I really determined to see something different? Or do I want to hang on to the wound, the suffering, the pain, the situation so that I can continue to play the part of an innocent victim? All right, so we're going to go back to workbook lesson number 5 again. And we'll start with paragraph 4. So in these exercises, more than in the preceding ones, you may find it hard to be indiscriminate and to avoid giving greater weight to some subjects than to others. It might help to precede the exercises with the statement, there are no small upsets. They are all equally disturbing to my peace. So again, in these exercises, more than in preceding ones, you may find it hard to be indiscriminate and avoid giving greater weight to some subjects than to others. And I think that's it's a challenge, especially when we first start out with the course. But as you keep practicing, it will be, I guess, as they say, a no-brainer. You'll immediately go to that place of, wait, I've lost my peace. Help, I want to find out who I am. But right now, we got to start with where we are, and we have to really hone in and focus on what appears to take my peace away. So again, there are no small upsets. They are all equally disturbing to my peace of mind. And much like in the practice of this, I've given the story of the person walking down the street and falling in a big hole and being in their hole for a very long time and eventually pulling themselves out. And then the next time walking down that street, falling in the hole, but not staying in there quite as long, and then walking down the street. Now, the third time they go down, they walk around the hole. The fourth time, they don't even go down the street. So that's really defines the progression of our practice of the course, that we will fall in the hole and, fall in hard, and then eventually get out, and then we'll fall in again in the next round. But slowly, we're just not pulled in to the specifics of the world as readily, and we certainly don't stay, and eventually we'll avoid it completely. That is just simply part of the progression, the process of working on this. Then examine your mind for whatever is distressing to you, regardless of how much or how little you think it is doing so. So again, he's trying to get us to the point of recognizing the significance does not lie in how big or small it is, or how much distress you're experiencing from it. It's about, again, am I at peace or am I not at peace? And if I'm not at peace, it doesn't matter what the formatting of that is. You may also find yourself less willing to apply today's idea to some perceived sources of upset than to others. And again, see how the ego just chops it up in little tiny pieces? But we also have to become aware, if I'm not ready to go there, I'm not ready to go there. I remember the story that Ken told of Helen, where she was having a challenge with a person, and Ken made some very helpful Course in Miracles kind of suggestions, of which she heeded. But then the next morning when Ken came to pick her up, she just lit into Ken and said, "Don't you ever tell me to do that again." Because even though Ken might have been ready to do that, she was not. And so if I think I have the wherewithal to know what's good for somebody else, I really need to spend more time in my process of really honing in on the little situations that are taking my peace away, and not worry about what somebody else is up to. So I cannot keep this form of upset and let others go. For the purpose of these exercises, then I regard them all as the same. So again, I cannot keep this form of upset and let the others go, because this is a very unequivocal course. I'm either in the ego or I'm out of the ego. And if part of what I'm dealing with I want to hold on to, it's just a recognition that I still have some tentacles within the ego thought system that I'm simply not spiritually mature enough to let go. And a lot of times that's because I'm too afraid of the love of God. But as we keep doing this, we become more acclimated to the trust of God's will and the desire to connect with God. And my intolerance of the ego thought system will start to rise as well. So this will become an experience of, I want this more and more, and this becomes less and less tolerant. Then search your mind for no more than a minute or so and try to identify a number of different forms of upset that are disrupting you. I'm just going to stop there. And, in this workbook lesson, he not only wants us to hone in specifics that occur in your daily life experiences, but to also become aware and identify the upsets in our mind that are still haven't been addressed. Doesn't matter if it's happening now or it's some thought that I've been carrying in my mind that continues to upset me. And I think a really good example of this is people who might get divorced. And what do? They talk about their spouse or their ex-spouse all day long. Well, the spouse is no longer even in their face any longer, but we can't let it go. And he wants us to identify those subtle concepts, ideas, and thoughts that continue to churn in our mind so that we can let those go as well. Because if I'm holding on to those, I'm not at peace again. And he goes on to say, regardless of the relative importance you may give them. So you may not even realize how much thought you're giving to them. And that's why a lot of our practice of the course is about observing, paying attention, honing in, look, make sure you're being very conscious of what's going on in this mind of ours. Apply the idea for today to each of them, using the name of both the source of the upset as you perceive it and of the feeling as you experience it. So in other words, not only do you name the source, but the upset as you perceive it. So I'm not worried about blank for the reason I think. I'm not depressed about blank for the reason I think. So we really want to go through this examination of I'm not angry for the reason I think, I'm not afraid for the reason I think, I'm not worried about such and such a thing for the reason I think, I'm not depressed about such and such for the reasons I think. So that, again, we're always filtering through this new way of thinking, and we don't let the thoughts just run us. We become aware enough so we can step back and reprocess them through a different set of examples. And he goes on to say 3 or 4 times during the day is enough. So he wants, so many of the workbook lessons are about teaching our mind to do this from a different place. And, just this workbook lesson, I'm never upset for the reason I think, is so valuable, because our automatic go-to is I'm upset because of my relationship of this circumstance, this situation in my world. And as he said, apply it specifically to whatever you believe is the cause of your upset, using the description of the feeling and whatever terms seem accurate to you. The upset may seem to be fear, worry, depression, anxiety, anger, hatred, jealousy, or any number of forms, all of which will be perceived as different. So it's almost like you're being bombarded by all these seemingly different experiences, but they're really just triggering this. So it isn't significant as to what they are. If we turn them to, wait, it's not about this. I'm not upset about that. I'm upset because I'm aligned with the ego. Holy Spirit, help me to see through your lens what my brother really is. And my brother really is the same as me instead of different from me. But as long as the ego mindset is engaged, I'm always going to perceive my brother as different than me. And there will always be that perpetual competition. But we also have to remember, I want this character to be here, no matter how much I can sit here and say, I don't want that to, I don't want this what's the word? this what's the word starts with P? I can't think of it, but anyways, this character that seemingly upsets me, I not only want him to be there, I need him to be there if I want to continue to play the role of the separated son. Because in order for me to be an innocent victim, I have to have a perpetrator. There's the word, a perpetrator. So on one level, I might sit here and say, no way do I want this in my life. But somewhere deep within, I actually not only want it, but need to have that in my life in order to play this game. But when I finally get to the point where I'm willing to drop this, even for that 1 second, then I can have the effects of an answer beyond my story. And, we've been talking about the idea of the gap. Well, that gap is filled with all my ego interpretations, all my ego belief systems. And as long as I hold that in my gap is full. There's no room for anything new. So I have to clear that out to allow that gap to be filled with what the Holy Spirit has to say. And, we're being asked to bring everything to the altar, but then we have to be willing to drop everything so that we can be shown the beauty of the altar without all my stories on it. As long as I'm carrying the stories, I can't see the clarity of the altar that's always available to me. And we need to also recognize that everything of the ego, the underlying content of that is I feel guilty because I believe I killed off God to exist. And as long as that guilt is held in my mind, and I'm going to be afraid of the love of God, even though the love of God is like, I'm here, come and get me anytime you want me. But if I don't trust that love, I'm not going to walk towards that love. And I'm going to stay firm to playing the game as it was originally set up by the ego. And remember, this is not about bodies. And that's a real challenge because 99.99% of our daily life experience is evolved around this character called me. And I usually show the picture, the chart of the hero of the dream. It's me, the center of attention of all these things that are occurring around me. And yet, I'm not really a body. So I have to go to the thought so that I can hone in on this because I can't take the body over here. And be very clear, despite the fact that you may not fully grasp this idea, when we are upset, we actually want to be upset so that we can play the part of an innocent victim. And I'm very aware that we're not consciously aware of that on the level that most of us, spend our time, because it simply feels like I was fine, you came along, bam, I've lost my peace, and it has to be you. And he wants us to redirect that and recognize that it's not about the circumstances of the world. It is about what thought system do I carry in my mind. And if I don't like the results of what's going on, and I recognize that it's an effect of this choice, and I'm ready to let it go, then I can choose to connect with the Holy Spirit, who will show us that nothing happened and that we are love, and so is our brother. But if I want to leave my brother out, then I don't want to connect with love. And isn't it true? I want God's grace to fall on me. I don't want God's grace to fall on that idiot that I don't like. But until I relinquish the stories that I have around the idiot, I can't be shown fully my connection with my brother and my connection with God. And literally, we're never upset about anything that goes on outside of us. Now, again, that's not how we experience this. We experience this as this is the problem. And Jesus wants us again to rise above, recognize if I'm triggered by something here, it simply means that. And, I so often share the example of Jesus dying on the cross. When Jesus died on the cross, most people perceive that experience as poor Jesus was an innocent victim of all those people that did those horrible things to him. But his mind was completely aligned with it worth the same. And when you're coming from that place, you're always coming from a place of recognition that your brother is simply expressing love or calling for love. And the only thing that we could possibly experience under those circumstances is automatically coming from a place that I would see my brother as, if it's a challenge, as a call for love. Well, we're still at the stages of maybe I go through all these contortions and then I ask to see through the eyes of God. But eventually we will literally come from a place that is just the automatic expression of who we are. And I think I mentioned at the beginning of the class on the first tape that it's no different than a traffic light. Well, we know the traffic light has a light behind it, and then it has a film over the different colors that project into the world that give us green and yellow and red. But the light is really where the cause is. So it doesn't matter what the outside picture is, that's about the film that's been placed in front of the light. But when you identify completely with the light, the only thing that the light can do is express that light outside automatically. But in the process, we're going to catch ourselves, re-question, what do I want? And realign with this until this becomes who we actually are. So with that, I think we will close, but do spend some time on this concept of I am determined to see so-and-so, whatever that upset is in your mind, differently. And really question as you go through the week, am I really serious? Am I really willing to see this scenario differently? Because I can use them and I can mouth all the words all I want, but do I really want to see it different? And am I willing to remove my investment in the story I carry in my mind so that he can replace it with his answer? All right, so take a nice big deep breath and let it all go. Forgive us our illusions, Father, and help us to accept our true relationship with you. And where there are no other, I knew I wasn't going to do this right. Forgive us our illusions, Father, and help us to accept our true relationship with you, in which there are no